It's 2:00, and it is Wednesday, July 20th, 2022, and I'm starting the sustainability channel right now. I want you to understand why I started it. This is my hobby, and it's been my hobby for half a century, or even longer. So I'm going to have to tell you the story of the sustainability channel first. And if everybody stays with me, I think you'll understand why I believe there is a new reality in store for all of us, that there is a renaissance in store for us, and that life can be really, really great right now because of a massive new resource that has been delivered to the earth, worth trillions of dollars every year. And I will argue that it should be deployed in favor of the people, not any special interest groups, governments, big business, etc. So let me tell you how all of this started. I was born in London of two journalists, smart ones, good ones, both leading Washington journalists in post-World War Washington, D.C. My father, the London Daily Telegraph, my mother, presidential speechwriter, State Department diplomat. She was Drew Pearson's admin. I mean, these were people who were connected and understood how the world worked. And it's all pretty simple when you get right down to it. Well, my mother had me in January of 1953, and my father was sent to the Middle East to chase wars, of which there are always plenty. And my mother decided that it was best that she return home. So that summer, I went to Aspen, Colorado, where my grandmother and grandfather had built the first new house. They had, I believe, the first new occupancy permit. There were several houses completed in the fall of '53. Most people know Aspen by its shishi reputation, but that's not exactly what it started for. It started because some very thoughtful intellectuals were wondering, how can we prevent a travesty like the Second World War from happening again? So the discussion was about peace. So that's where Aspen started, was how can we foster peace? Now, in the particular household that I landed in, peace was a matter of no small discussion, because my grandmother, who was born in 1893, was an ardent supporter of having a Secretary of Peace in the U.S. Cabinet. She was also an ardent political activist, well-informed, and she corresponded with everybody. She corresponded with Castro, Eleanor Roosevelt, all the way through Jimmy Carter. I think she stopped when Ronald Reagan was elected, not because of her preferences, but rather because of her age. But Graham wanted a Secretary of Peace. Here was her reasoning. She said that she was about 20, born in 1893 or 1894, we'll say. She was 20 when World War I started, and she saw the boys go, many not to come back, and many others coming back compromised somehow. War had violated something in their spirit that could never recover. So what was she to do? She was raising her family by then. My mother was born in 1922. So in 1941, when the U.S. entered the war, she was 19, and the same thing started happening. The boys were leaving, many not coming back, and others coming back in dire condition. Others managed the war quite well. And it just comes down to the individual. Not good or bad, just the way their chemistry is. We'll talk about that. So by this point, Graham was becoming more cynical. And my mother, who just ascended rapidly in post-World War Washington, D.C., she was Phi Beta Kappa from Stevens. She was utterly brilliant and became the seventh highest woman and the youngest woman in the U.S. Department of State, if I've got that right, to lead a delegation, a foreign delegation she did to Central and Latin America, I believe. In any case, my mother was no dummy. She graduated law school in 2.5 years and became a judge finally. And throughout the conversation of Graham's Secretary of Peace, because we used to have a Secretary for War, right? Then it became Defense. So because of Graham's desire, I can remember my mother looking at me very earnestly. She was thin, she was beautiful, extremely intelligent, but she was a tough interrogator. She said, well, Jamie, what would it do? Now, my mother and I had lived in the house in Aspen together where she ran her law practice for years. And I was familiar with how business deals work. It's not that complicated. And she said, it has to pencil. And I did. I knew it had to pencil. The military-industrial complex is massive. And not only is it massive, it's important to understand, which a lot of my contemporaries in the 60s were unwilling to accept or even consider, that those were huge businesses that kept people to work and made mortgage payments and sent people to college and bought vacations and so many other things, so that the fabric and the flow of life of the 20th century, I believe it is fair to say, is defined by war. It's not a bad thing, it's just the way it was. 2 European wars into which the United States entered raised the U.S. to a figure of prominence. And throughout the Cold War and up until the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War was the dominant source of conflict, perceived conflict in the earth. And we built massive military arsenals. Okay, fine. It's a done deal. It's the last time I recall hearing a number for the military budget was $750 billion. So when the United States uses its influence in the world, we are perceived as helicopter gunships, armed soldiers, and cable TV. That is the legacy which the United States has gained over the past 60 years. Now, everybody knows that there are bad actors in the world out there, bad actors like Vladimir Putin, and we need a strong Department of Defense. I'm all for that. But the point is that there are countries that are sitting on the fence ideologically. And it is essential that we consider the reality of what those people are living through right now. This is a job of putting our best foot forward, of Americans putting our best foot forward. And if I were to suggest to you that we had defined ourselves by arming the world in the 20th century, by war, by the sword, I'm suggesting that we distinguished ourselves through the development of sustainability and self-reliance technologies throughout the 21st century. I am suggesting that freedom and democracy, although messy, is really the ideal condition for humans in which humans can exist. And so we need to foster that. Well, the problem is for the last 60 years, the United States has been dissed. I mean, dissed and dissed and dissed and dissed and dissed, and all the stuff that went wrong. All the things that went wrong frustrate people. I understand. I understand that during the King of the Hill times, which was previous to now, Koth, King of the Hill, right? I think there was even a cartoon on it. But the Koth times created huge gaps. There's a lot of technological progress. There's a lot of good things that happened. A lot of people's lives were improved, but there were still gaps. And as I look at those gaps, they are opportunity gaps. That's what I see. And so we have to, both in our country and in countries abroad, we need to bring opportunity to people's doorsteps, to their living rooms, to their smartphones, so that everyone has equal access to information. I think that will go a long way to reducing inequality all over the world. Now, Gen Z's already figured out that everybody's equal. Skin color, that sort of thing, is irrelevant. They figured out, they wonder, I think, why there are 900 million people starving in the world. They just don't understand why people let that happen. And they've seen their parents running and gunning, trying to make it in this mixed up world of ours, and they just stepped aside. It's like we're on the merry-go-round and they're sitting there saying, why are you guys doing this? This is crazy. So there's so much to talk and think about in this world. And we're just getting started. Okay, now let's talk about you. Right? You. Who are you? What are you made out of? What's your future? What's your past? Where did you come from? Why are you here? Where are you going? If you don't have answers to those questions, then you're not living. I mean, come on. So think about that for a second. Just who are you? Where did you come from? You know you came from your mom and dad. Your mother gave birth to you. In the 1 minute, have we talked about Kolob? Let's talk about Kolob for a second, because that's going to be helpful. Kolob is, or thereabouts, it's a region in the universe, which is where our spirits came from. You had a unique, eternal spirit before you got here. And at the time that your mother and father conceived you, sperm and egg, processes began in both the eternities and right here in mortality. Let's talk about time zones just so that we get that out of the way. Kolob, one day in Kolob's about 1,000 years down here. If you run the numbers, take a spreadsheet and look at it, that's going to mean that for every decade, about 14.4 minutes passes in Kolob. If you live 100 years a year, that's 2 hours and 24 minutes. And I think the director's cut of The Fellowship of the Ring was longer than that. This is your own movie, but it's just a movie. Keep thinking, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. If things are going really good, remember, they end. If things are going really bad, that ends too. So just keep that in mind. So you're an eternal being engaged in a brief mortal experience. Okay? You want to know what else? This whole earth was created by beings far more advanced than we are. Okay? And we are being monitored, if you can believe that. But you'll understand it and you'll go, whoa, that's so cool. And it is cool. And you only have to worry about what you know from now on, not in the past. But here's the deal. When you were conceived, two things happened in the eternities. First, your spirit, your identity, your eternal identity, you existed before you got here, right? Okay, your eternal identity and something called the light of Christ. Now, the light of Christ is beyond our mortal comprehension in its complexity. But let's just suggest that by using quantum entanglement, which Albert Einstein called spooky action at a distance, you are being monitored. And the degree of monitoring is preparatory for a harvest that will take place after you complete your mortal stay. After we all do. This happens to every human. So don't feel singled out. Just feel like, oh, maybe I should do XYZ, whatever that is. So I call it the Light of Christ RFID code, but it is also a tracker. It's a monitor. It animates your body. When the light of Christ leaves, you die. And it is attached to an eternal record of your existence. Now, years ago, when Catherine and I first moved into Alpine, Utah, there was an apple orchard down the street, and Catherine would sort apples. I picked apples, and she would sort them. And depending on which hole they went through, the apple would be put in a different bin and sold for a different amount of money, used for different things. Some were applesauce, some were apple juice. They were all used and in a benign and profitable way, but they were different. Well, that's us, brothers and sisters, that's us. When the harvest goes, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, or me, they're going to look at us and say, well, how'd they do? Now, it's important to realize that the human body and spirit are divided into an upper and lower kind of sections. And if the upper rules the lower, things are groovy. Life goes on very well because you do have the light of Christ on board, and you can just keep choosing the right and everything works great. But if the lower starts to rule the upper, that's when things get sticky. And that's when, people start becoming too engaged in the material life. Think about this. all of us, the guys in the field and track throw the hammer. It's a 16-pound ball at the end of a 36-inch chain or something like that. And they twirl around. And I often wondered, how fast does that ball go when they let go of it? 65 miles an hour. Now, if you run the numbers again, we're traveling at an orbit, it's a 100 and, well, the radius to the sun is 94 million miles, and the diameter would be 188 million miles, and pi d is the circumference, and that's about 550 million miles. So we're doing a good 1,500,000 miles a day. As I recall, that means we're running about 1,000 miles a minute. So think of this from the standpoint of a greater intelligence. I mean, we see our cars and our houses and all that stuff, and we're reminded not to take, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Because what's God going to look down at? He's just going to see the points of light that represent us, the lights of Christ. He'll get to the harvest later. He knows we're there. And that's not to say miracles don't happen, and that doesn't mean that you can't become closer to or farther away from God. But that's your decision. So I'm checking time because I'm ad-libbing this. I don't know if anybody's watching. And I guess this is just practice because I'm going to do it again tomorrow, another 30 minutes, I think, maybe longer. So let's just summarize to this point. You are an eternal being engaged in a brief mortal experience. Your identity existed time immemorial before and will exist time immemorial after this brief earth life. But this is an essential, important part of your existence because time is compressed and you can use it as a springboard to spring yourself towards order and becoming more like God, or away and becoming less like Him. Now, if you don't believe anything I have to say, then don't. I'm telling you the truth. This is the God's honest truth. I've died. I've been through this. I was 8 years old. I was riding my horse Leprechaun, Connemara pony, beautiful thing, dappled gray. And I'd been sick and hadn't ridden, and I was running flat out along a fence line. I just had to jog through a little gate. It was wide enough. It was a ranch gate. And just as I dodged through that, Nancy Lamb came out of a big irrigation ditch. Just, had a sandy bottom. The horses liked walking on it. It was dry. It was November, and my horse shied. And my left foot caught in a stirrup, and I hit frozen ground flat on my back. And I died. My liver was shattered. And I can remember ascending. And then it went really fast. But I looked down for just a minute, and there was me laying on the ground. Vicki Emery had said, Jamie, get up, get up. And I did. And then I just crumpled. And she said, oh, no, not that way. And that was the last I ever heard. Then I'm looking down, and I see the tableau laid out before me, the horses, me laying on the ground, the people looking at me. I'm out of there. All of a sudden, I'm in a room that looks like any bureaucratic room, like a hospital or a functional room, a prison, a jail, where the walls are just painted gray and everything's very functional. And two women were there. And it seems to me that I was on a bed, and so with no preparatory anything, this woman asked me, "Well, you want to stay or you want to go?" And to my left was a double door, and I believe that led to the eternities, to my end, and to the right was somewhere else. And sorry, but there's nothing I can do about that. And I said, "Where are my grandmother and my grandfather and my mother?" And they said, "Well, they're there and you're here." And I said, "I want to go back." "20 minutes later, Earth time, I opened my eyes and I was surrounded by gowned and hooded figures, doctors and nurses and specialists. One of them stuck a needle right under my sternum, and it seemed like it was a great big needle to an 8-year-old kid, and it had a syringe on it the size of a Coke bottle. And he started to pull blood out of my chest. And I thought, well, that's about enough. And I went out. So I've already been there. I already know that every one of us is the same as me. Every last one of us is an eternal being engaged in a brief mortal experience. And there's something called the light of Christ, which animates us, which connects us to God. According to Ephesians, he says, he says, which is that light of Christ, which is the earnest of our inheritance until the redemption of the purchased possession under the praise of his glory. The earnest of our inheritance. In other words, the light of Christ is bestowed within us. And our inheritance are the infinite creations of our Father, of his Son, and of a world that is so exciting and complete and complex. I invite you to help me with my project. There's just me sitting here, right? Looking at a camera and hoping that this is broadcasting and doing its right. So help me. If you believe in sustainability, help me. If you believe you are moving from the sword to the word, help me. I'm a diabetic and my meter's going off. I don't know what else to say, but I love you all. We're going to change this world. We're going to change the reality. We're going to make it a better place. We're going to have a renaissance, if I have anything to say about it. My name is Jamie Johnston, and I say, happy trails to you until we meet again. That's it.